Hello and good morning, Salt Church. My name is Tyler Heberer, and I help lead a home group on Thursday nights with my husband Jeremy and Beth and Keith Brown Eyes. Just to put a little plug in, if that's something that you guys want to start in 2026, is coming to a home group. It's a place to connect with people around you, to support and encourage, and learn more about Jesus' love. So I think there's a list of the different home groups on the QR code in front of you, but also come grab me at the back afterwards if you want to learn more about home groups. So today I have the honor to read scripture, which is going to be out of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, beginning with Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Then Mark 9:49-50. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. And then Luke 14:34-35. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. This is the word of the Lord.
Amen, amen. You guys can go ahead and grab a seat. Guys, it's 2026. It's crazy. This is a quarter of a century into the millennium. We made it. Congrats, you're here. My name is Jonathan Randall. I'm one of the pastors on staff. So glad that you guys have joined us. We got a lot going on this morning. Today is a family Sunday. So parents, just so you know, your kids are always welcome in this gathering, no matter the Sunday. But we do these family Sundays from time to time to remind us that kids are not the church of tomorrow. They're the church of today. So kids, special welcome to you in the room. Additionally, we have some visitors from the state of Georgia, an all-guys trip from a school down there. And we're really excited to have you guys. They'll be here all week serving different organizations in northern Colorado. So pumped to have you. Additionally, if it feels a little empty in here, it's because our college students were away this weekend at the Salt Company Conference. If you didn't know, our church is part of a church planting movement called the Salt Network. The heartbeat of this network is simple: to plant a church near every university across the nation to reach the next generation. So every church we plant is planted with a salt company, a college ministry to reach that campus. And every year, all of these salt companies get together for one massive event, the Salt Company Conference. And what I love most about this conference isn't just that there's thousands of college students singing praise to Jesus, incredible teaching, although that's true, that does happen at this conference. But the reason I love this conference is because the main emphasis is church planting. Like, they don't just have a seminar on church planting. It's the key feature. Like, there's booths and everything. They bring them up on stage. Everything is geared towards church planting. And right now there are 40 salt companies across the nation. There's going to be 5 more in 2026 and even more in 2027. And here's what's cool. This first picture is the first group we ever sent to Salt Company Conference. This was the beginning of 2023. We hadn't even started our Salt Company yet. It was just a glint in our eyes. And then this year, 3 years later, this is how many we sent. They took up a whole section of the bleachers. It's incredible what God has done in 3 years. But here's what gets me really excited. Some of this, go back to that first picture. Some of these students have already graduated, moved away, and helped plant churches with new salt companies to get started. So that means then when I look at this year's photo, you can throw that up there. When I look up at this year's photo, I don't just see students attending a conference. I see future church planners, future missionaries on college campuses, future men and women who are going to move away to a different place, get a job, start a family, and see something start from scratch so that others can meet Jesus. Because that's why that conference matters. That's why we invest in college ministry. Because that's why Salt Church exists. Now, speaking of Salt Church, I want to do something this morning that I don't know if we've done. Maybe we did in our core team days, but I want to do this morning. I want to talk about our church name. Guys, believe it or not, coming up with a church name is harder than coming up with names for your kids. It's really hard. Initially, we almost didn't go with Salt Church. We had some other names. We almost went with City Light Church. But there's a City Lights, plural, here in Greeley, so it's confusing, right? We almost went with Weld City Church, but Weld is a county, not a city. Felt like that would confuse people. Keith even joked about calling it the Members of the International Saints Tabernacle. It's kind of a mouthful, sounds impressive, but that would spell moist church. I don't know who that church is for. It's not for me. Just kidding. Keith didn't do that. Anyway, we landed on Salt Church. And to be completely transparent, the reason we did that is because we had to call our college ministry Salt Company. We had to go with that name. And so we're like, well, why don't we just call it Salt Church? Salt Company, Salt Church, makes sense. It worked. Because our name actually matters for a much deeper reason. It's not just branding. It comes straight from your Bible. Next week, Keith's going to kick off our new series in the core values. But today, I want to talk about our namesake. What does it mean to be salt as a church? Salt's one of those things that I don't think we realize how essential it is because it's so ordinary. Salt is everywhere. Salt is actually in everything. Did you know there are trillions. There are trillions of tons of salt in our oceans. If you actually pulled it out of the ocean, spread it out all over the land on the planet, it would cover all the land mass in under 900 feet of salt. That's how much salt is in our oceans. Because we add salt to so many foods that we basically split food into two categories, right? You have sweet and then you have salty, right? But unlike sugar, which is basically bad for you, salt is essential for life. Salt enables nerve signaling, muscle contraction, fluid balance, cardiovascular function. Without salt, your body falls apart. Every civilization since the dawn of time has figured this out. That's why you just see salt throughout history of humanity. They figured out, hey, we can't live without this. And salt's not just good for eating. We use it to make everything. Soap, detergents, rubber, paper, glass, plastics, pharmaceuticals. More than half of all chemical products involve salt in some way, shape, or form on the production stage. We spread salt on roads when it snows, right? Or at least I've heard. I'm not convinced we do that in Colorado anymore. Here's the point. Salt does a lot of things. It's ordinary but essential. It's everywhere, and yet it affects everything it touches. So when Jesus comes along and he says his followers are like salt, what he's saying is, hey, you might be ordinary, but you're absolutely essential. If salt is everywhere, then Christ's teaching should speak to every part of our lives. Just like salt has a ton of functions, this teaching from Jesus has a variety of applications. And guys, this matters. Believe it or not, this matters not just for you, but for all of us. Every January, churches will try to do a sermon on being a better you, a new you for the new year, right? But guys, real lasting change doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in community. Every January 1st shouldn't be about a new you, it should be about a new y'all, right? So in 2026, what if you stopped chasing a better you and started helping build a better us? What if you didn't just work on yourself at the gym, but you walked with others in a home group? What if you didn't just set goals, but you committed to this local gathering every Sunday? Because here's the reality, guys. Every time Jesus uses the word salt in the Gospels, it's always plural. Always. You cannot be salt alone. It's Salt Church, not Salt Christian. And our church isn't just named Salt because it sounds cool. It's named Salt because at the end of the day, that's our calling. The world doesn't need improved individuals. It needs followers of Jesus together living as salt. And so this morning, we're going to look at 3 teachings of Jesus on salt. One from Matthew, one from Mark and one from Luke. Each one has a different context because it's driving home a different point. So there's 3 angles, but there's one calling to be salt. And so here are the 3 takeaways. Hope permanently for others, deal decisively with sin, commit entirely to Christ. Those are my 3 takeaways this morning. Hope permanently for others, deal decisively with sin, commit entirely to Christ. Let me show you these straight from the words of Jesus. So that first one, hope permanently for others. Let's look at perhaps Christ's most famous teaching on salt. Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, says this: "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds or good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So what does Jesus mean when he says you're the salt of the earth, right? In our day, salt of the earth has kind of become an expression for someone that's hardworking, humble, hospitable people, right? Like, you're going to love these people. They eat meat, love baseball, and they call a remote a clicker, right? It's like they're salt of the earth, right? Like, that's kind of how we use that phrase. But I think Jesus is getting at something much deeper. And what helps us is he pairs salt with another metaphor, light, right? So really, to understand what it means to be salt of the earth, we've got to know what it means to be the light of the world. To do that, let's go back to our Old Testament, a little Bible study time. In the book of Exodus, second book of your Bible, God brings Israel out of slavery so that they can worship him. That's why so much of the second half of the book of Exodus is about building the tabernacle. The tabernacle is where God met with his people as they worshiped him, right? And the tabernacle was a prototype for what would later become the temple. That's where they would worship God as well. And in the tabernacle and temple, when you read the descriptions of how they are built, there's an enormous emphasis on light. Lampstands, oil, gold, flame, right? Why is there that kind of emphasis in the temple? Because the temple was designed to glow. The lamps burned continually. The light reflected off the gold. It was a space filled with brightness. What was behind all that? Why do all that? Well, think about what light actually does. Light does not exist to draw attention to itself. Light exists to help other people see. Have you ever tried to stare directly at the sun? Kids, don't do that, by the way. You'll singe your cornea. You'll burn your eye. Why? Because the sun isn't meant to be stared at. The sun is meant to help you see everything else. That's what Israel was meant to do. They weren't chosen so the world would stare at them. They were chosen so the world would see God. Every time Israel gathered for worship, they were casting a big light on God. Everything that Israel did was meant to reveal, like a light, everything that God was like. Because here's the truth. If the nations could catch just a glimpse of who God was, it would change the world. Now, you don't have to get past Exodus very far to find out that Israel fails every turn in this task. They don't fulfill this job. So fast forward to the prophet Isaiah, and you read about this one servant in Israel, an Israelite who does not fail. Isaiah 42:6 says this: "I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness." You there is singular, not plural. He's talking about one individual. He's talking about this servant. "I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations." Because that passage is talking about Jesus. Jesus is the light to the nations. That's why Jesus himself says, "I am the light of the world." Here's where this gets interesting though. In Matthew, Jesus doesn't just say, "I'm the light of the world." What does he say? He looks at his disciples and he says, y'all are the light of the world. In other words, when you give your life to Jesus, Jesus' light shines through you. Jesus doesn't just save you, he sends you. Notice in Matthew, light operates the same way as it does in the Old Testament. The goal of the good works is not just so that people will be impressed with us. Why do we do good works? What does the text say? so that other people will glorify God. Same as in the Old Testament. Israel worshiped not so that it was all about them, it was so that they could cast light on who God is. See, in the Old Testament, the nations, they had to go to Israel to see the light in the temple as people worship God. In the New Testament, it reverses. God actually sends his people out to the nations as the new temple with the light of the gospel, inviting everyone to worship King Jesus, that his name might be exalted across the earth. Now, what is that? What in the world does that have to do with salt? Well, scholars point out that in the ancient world, salt often symbolized something permanent, enduring, lasting. You actually see this in Numbers 18:19 as an example. It says, all the holy contributions that the people of Israel present to the Lord, I give to you and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual due. It is the covenant of salt forever before the Lord for you and for your offspring. All I want to do in that verse is get you to see that salt and forever are paired together. It's permanent. So come back to the Matthew passage, and what's permanent there? If we're salt of the earth, what's permanent? We are followers of Jesus. We're the salt of the earth. Guys, when Jesus is pairing salt and light, here's what he's saying. He's saying God will never let the light go out in the world because of you. You exist. The church exists. The reason we can say we're the salt of the earth is because the reign of Jesus is permanent through the church. The gospel is enduring because the church always exists. There will always be worship of God on this planet so long as the church is here. That's why we're the salt of the earth. Let me put it to you this way as a contrast. As light, our calling is to invite others to worship King Jesus. That's what it means to be light. As salt, our calling is to believe that King Jesus has not given up on this world. It's to hope that God is still seeking and saving the lost in this world, that he's using us as a light to shine light on who God is, that others might turn to him and be saved. That's what it means to be salt. It's like Motel 6, right? You know their little phrase, we'll leave the light on for you, right? The church is God leaving the light on for the world indefinitely. Because you realize what this means. This means no matter how bad things get, no matter what the headlines say, no matter what social media insists is happening, the world is not lost in darkness because God's people are still here. The world still contains the church, and his light is shining through them. Let me just say this bluntly. Guys, I am absolutely exhausted reading statistics about the American church. It seems like they come out every week and they're worse than the ones before. People are deconstructing. Attendance is shrieking. The next generation is leaving the church. Listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying those things aren't true. I do think they're true. There's a lot of evidence to back it up. But here's what I also know to be true. Jesus said he would build his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. If Jesus is not dead, then neither is his church. He will always preserve a remnant. He's given his people as a light to the world, and he's never going to let that light go out. Do you believe that? Do you believe that this morning? Those who hold to that kind of hope for the world, those who believe that the church, which contains the light of the world, who is Jesus, those who believe that that is ultimately the hope for all the nations, they're the ones Jesus calls salt of the earth. Now, if you noticed in Isaiah and Numbers, the word covenant was used. A covenant is a binding commitment. In our culture, really, the clearest picture of a covenant is marriage, right? And in a young church like ours, I love it because there's so many couples getting engaged and getting married. And I love the difference between guys and girls when it comes to the announcement of an engagement, right? Like when you find out your bro is engaged, you're like, sweet, dude. Like, when's the wedding? Like, cool. You want to grab some wings? Sounds good, right? Like, that's kind of how guys react. But like, ladies, when you find out your bestie is engaged, right? Like there's a freak out moment. There's screaming, there's balloons, there's cake, there's champagne, there's photography, right? Like everybody gathers around and looks at the shiny rock on her hand, right? That's how they react. There's all this amazement. I say that to say this, guys, that reaction is what it should look like when the world comes into contact with Christians. Every room we walk into, there should be celebration, joy, gladness. Why? Because of what we have in Jesus. Even if people don't believe our message about who he is, our relationship with Jesus should be so compelling that people react to us the same way ladies react to their friend when she gets engaged. That's what a permanent hope does every time it walks in the room. When you have a permanent hope that everything is going to be up and to the right because Jesus is coming back, he's still seeking and saving the lost, the church is still on the move. When you have that kind of hope, there's this buoyancy that just elevates the room, right? Church, it's one thing to say that you're a hopeful person. It's another thing to let that hope just spill out of you. Hope uplifts, hope encourages, hope brings joy. Maybe to help us understand this, let's look at the opposite of hope. Do you know what the opposite of hope is? It's not doubt. It's complaining. If you read your Old Testament, you'll see that Israel complained all the time. Israel complained in the wilderness. And it still happens today. I can't tell you how many Christians I know just complain. Our country's falling apart. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. Church doesn't have the ministries I like. The older generation ruined the economy. The younger generation is entitled, right? Like complain. But here's the thing. This is what I absolutely love about our church. I hardly see that here. Like I really don't see that here. In fact, I hear so many people say it's almost overwhelming that they love our church, and it's not because of the music or the preaching, it's because of you, the people. Like I've lost track of how many times I've heard someone say, man, I don't know what it is, but the people at Salt Church, something is just different. I can tell you what it is. It's hope. It's you being salt. It's you choosing to speak hope into the world instead of complaining about the church. Colossians 4, I love this, 5 and 6 says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious and seasoned with what? Salt. That's what you guys do every time you speak hope into the world. Walk in wisdom with outsiders. Every time people come in here and you're not a bunch of complainers, but you're a bunch of people filled with hope, that's speaking, that's letting your conversation be seasoned with salt. Notice here, salt is seasoning. How do you use seasoning? Right? Like if you have a salt shaker, you're not like pouring one little grain out and trying to like siphon it off and then dump it on your food. No, what do? You take the whole shaker and you dump a bunch of salt grains out onto your food. What that means then, guys, is this is something we do together, not individually. Salt is a community thing. One grain of salt does nothing, but a lot of salt enhances everything. Right? Like mashed potatoes are the blandest food on the planet. You throw salt on them, they're everybody's favorite, right? You put A1 sauce or ketchup on a steak, you've ruined it. All you need is a salt rub, medium rare, cook it, perfection, right? Turkey is essentially tofu. It ruins Thanksgiving. People hate it. Give it a brine, all of a sudden it's edible, right? We are the salt of the earth. The only way we can do that is together. The only way you can season these kinds of food is not with one little grain of salt. It has to be a bunch of salt. The only way salt can be seasoning is you need a lot of it. It's not just an individual calling for us. It's a church-wide identity. Because that means then when we gather here and we scatter out there, we are offering to the world a taste of the world to come. We're offering the world a taste of what it looks like to have life with God. We're offering the world a taste of what it looks like to have Jesus on the throne and a kingdom where he rules and reigns. We're offering the world hope. That's what it means to be salt. We're giving people a taste of hope in the world to come. And Jesus challenges us here at the end. Notice he asks, if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? Because it's a rhetorical question. You're not supposed to wander around being like, can sodium chloride literally cease to exist? Answer is no. Like salt is always salt. That question is meant to confront us with these questions. Are we actually living like salt? Are we giving people a taste of who God is? Are we keeping the light on him and not on us? Salt Church, we are the salt of the earth. That means our hope in Jesus and in the church never runs out. And that's a hope that the world desperately needs as they peer in and they say, man, something about these people is different. They have a permanent hope. That's what it means to be salt. Now, second part of what it means to be salt, deal decisively with sin. Deal decisively with sin. As a parent, I've discovered that my kids, and I just think all kids in general, they hate being medically treated for anything, right? Like a couple of my kids had pink eye, and I had to put eye drops in their eyes. And the way that they wrestle and squirm and throw punches at you, you would think it's the 1700s and I'm trying to cauterize a bullet wound with like an iron poker. Like that's how they react, right? I know you don't have to use, I just found this out in the set, after the first gathering, but you don't need to use hydrogen peroxide anymore. Does anybody else know this? Apparently, okay, well, I'm still using hydrogen peroxide. But when you put it on a wound, it fizzes, right? When I do that to my kids, the glare that I get, you would think I have poisoned my kids, right? They scream and they're like, what did you just do to me? And as parents, what are we thinking? Man, I know this hurts, but if you don't deal with it now, it's going to get way worse later, right? That's exactly what Mark's gospel is getting at when Jesus teaches on salt in Mark 9. He's saying, I know this will hurt, but if you don't deal with sin now in this life, in the next life, it's going to be far worse. Mark 9, 43 through 50. Let me give some context to the verses we already read. It says this, and if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Here's our verses. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. Okay, Jesus is not saying you need to literally cut off your hand, foot, or eye, right? He's using exaggeration. It's a word called hyperbole. It's a literary technique. He wants to use exaggeration so that you take sin seriously. He speaks in extremes here because sin is extremely dangerous. He doesn't enjoy seeing us in pain. Like any good parent, he knows that what happens if you don't treat a wound, things get worse. So Jesus says, deal with sin decisively now, even when it's painful, because untreated sin always gets worse. It doesn't fix itself. It will spread. So the fundamental question then is, how do we deal with sin? Well, let's work this teaching all the way through. This is pretty cool. I didn't really know this until this week, but Jesus is driving home a point with this teaching. Imagine a man who struggles with sexual sin, right? And he's having sex with his girlfriend and he says, well, I don't want to do that anymore, so I'm going to cut off my hands so that I don't touch her inappropriately anymore. But then he realizes, well, wait a minute, I can still go to the strip club and commit sexual sin there, so I'm going to chop off my feet and just be homebound and I can't go anywhere. But then he realizes, well, wait a minute, I can still look at pornography and commit sexual sin, so I need to gouge out my eyes, right? And on it goes. He just keeps lopping off body parts and it just keeps spiraling. Why? Because the man can't cut out the part of his body that actually causes sin, his heart. Right? This is why Jesus says in Mark 7:21, for from within, out of the heart of the man, come evil thoughts. You want to deal with sin? You got to go to the source. You need a new heart. That's why Jeremiah and Ezekiel promised a day when God himself will give one. You can't cut out your own heart. You need Jesus to give you one. And guys, a new heart, what does that mean? A new heart means not only that you hate sin, it also means that you love Jesus. Because you can't just hate sin and expect for that to save you. You can't just say no to sin and expect yourself to be good. You also have to start saying yes to Jesus over and over and over again. And as you cultivate a love for Jesus, it'll begin to outweigh your love for sin. That's what it means to have a new heart. Church, the most important question you can ask yourself today is, have you said yes to Jesus? He's the only one who can save. He's the only one who can give you a new heart. But make no mistake, if you say yes to Jesus, you have to say no to sin. It's a package deal. You cannot give a yes to Jesus and then a wink, wink to sin and say, well, I'll keep some of this on the side. You got to cut it out. That's the backdrop to one of Jesus' most confusing statements, which is our text. Everyone will be salted with fire. What in the world does he mean by that? Let's unpack that. Just like salt and light go together, how light helped us understand salt, fire and salt go together in this passage. Fire actually helps us understand salt. Fire has a dual effect, right? It can purify gold in a furnace, but it can also destroy. It can burn your house to the ground. Salt works the same way, right? When I grew up in Florida, going to the beach, a lot of people said, like, if you got a cut at the beach, just go wash it off in the ocean, right? There's salt water in there. It'll help you. Looking back on that, I'm like, what in the world were we thinking? Like, sharks smell blood and they live in there, right? Like, animals do their business in there. It's filled with gross bacteria. There is literally a flesh-eating bacteria that will rot your brain that lives in the ocean. The ocean is terrifying. Why would you ever wash anything off in there, right? What you actually need is saline. Salt in the right form and context cleans and heals, but unmanaged salt water can actually do real damage. Do you see the similarities for salt and fire here? They both force a decision. Fire can purify or it can destroy. Salt can heal or it can damage. Put this together, this is what Jesus is saying. Don't wait. Deal with sin now. Like salt in the wound, let it sting. Like fire on precious metal, let it burn. Let God remove the impurities of sin of your life and cleanse the part of your lives that are infected. Because here's the reality. If you don't deal with sin decisively now, it will kill you in hell. Here's the thing we can't miss though. When God is talking about this kind of severity of hell and judgment, he doesn't start out there with the world. He starts right here in the church. Because I won't mix words here. There are more scriptural references to salt being used as judgment than to anything else. Let me show you this. When Lot's wife turns back to Sodom, she becomes a pillar of what? Salt, right? That's a story Jesus references about his own judgment day when he will return. Moses warns Israel that if they break God's covenant, their land will be burned with brimstone and what? Salt. When Abimelech destroys Shechem, he sows it with what? Salt. The psalmist described God turning a fruitful land into salty waste because of the evil of the inhabitants. Over and over and over again, salt expresses God's judgment on sin, especially those who call on his name. Really, wherever you see salt in scripture, it's most likely God saying, I care too much about people to just ignore sin. We're going to deal with that. So salt's not just this cute metaphor. It's serious. But here's where this gets interesting and cool. Guys, God's judgment begins with the church and his people so that condemnation does not come later. God deals with it now on the cross so that we aren't thrown into hell forever. Judgment may start with the house of God, but for those who have put their faith in Jesus, it ends at the cross. Once you know that fire and salt can change you and not condemn you, you will now come to God ready to deal with your sin. Do you know there's one place in scripture outside of Mark 9 where salt and fire come together? It's in Leviticus 2:13. It says this, you shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all your offerings, you shall offer salt. Okay, Israel comes to worship. They bring these sacrifices, right? They're placed on the altar. Fire consumes the sacrifice. They sprinkle it with salt. You see fire and salt right there. Why? Because salt symbolized purity and sincerity and faithfulness. Fire is symbolizing that this sacrifice is now going to be burned up and accepted. Adding salt was a way of saying, hey, God, that sacrifice, that fire that's burning forgives me, but I also want a holy life. I don't want to just be forgiven of my sins. I want that forgiveness to actually change how I live. Fire was the atoning part. It burned up the sacrifice. Salt was the purifying part. Here, let me put this together. The same salt that represents judgment when sin is left untouched represents purity when sin is surrendered. Let me repeat that. The same salt that represents judgment when sin is left untouched represents purity when sin is surrendered. Because salt will always show up when God is taking sin seriously, and there's no place where sin is taken more seriously than a sacrifice. An animal had to die to atone for sin. Jesus had to die as a sacrifice for your sin and for mine. But is the sacrificial system done away with? Not necessarily. Romans 12:1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a what? A living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. Okay, let me be clear on this. We don't bring animals to an altar and sacrifice them anymore. Jesus has dealt with our sin once and for all. Judgment has been absorbed on the cross. But that doesn't mean we take sin lightly. Now we offer ourselves to God, not to be destroyed, but to be transformed. That's a living sacrifice. And honestly, that's what it means to be salt. See, before we can change the world, we need to be changed. Before we live as salt out there, Jesus needs to put salt in here. Salt has to preserve us as a church before we can preserve the world as the salt of the earth. Before we confront the sins of the world, we must deal decisively with sins in our own heart and in the church. Mark 9 ends by saying, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. Guys, peace among believers is one of the clearest signs that we're taking sin seriously. If you can learn to live in unity and harmony with other Christians, that's a sure sign that you're taking sin seriously. Because here's what I know. We could be pursuing holiness 1,000 different ways, but if we treat other Christians like garbage, the world will never believe that Jesus and change in him is possible. Back in my freshman year of college, one of my roommates had hunted geese that fall and then taken the meat and actually put it in our freezer. But in our dorm, you actually had to unplug the fridge over winter break, and he left it in there. And so 3.5 weeks later, we returned to our dorm room, we opened up the fridge, and the smell that came out, man, it could peel the paint off the walls. I've lived in Greeley for 3 years. I've never smelled anything like that. And it's not like, none of us were like running up to the fridge. We're like, let's just get more of that. What were we doing? We're all like covering up and running out of the room. No one ran at that fridge to clean it out. I think we like threw it out the window and got rid of it. It was like irredeemable at that point. I share that to say this, guys. If we want to be salt, we cannot run away from the awful, putrid, rancid places of the world. We can't avoid tough relationships. We can't avoid conflict. We can't avoid people that are hard to love. We have to run towards them, get in there, and clean it like salt cleans a wound. And perhaps the best place to start doing that is in our own hearts and in this room before we ever head out there. Because when we deal with our own sin, we will finally have something to offer the world. Lastly, commit entirely to Jesus. Commit entirely to Jesus. Luke's gospel also has a teaching from Jesus on salt. Again, I'm going to give you some broader context here so we can understand how he's using it. Luke 14:25-35. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he's able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good. but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's of no use, either the soil or the manure pile. It's thrown away. He who has ears, let him hear. Again, Jesus is not literally telling you, hey, you need to hate your mother and your brother and your sister and your family. He's not saying that, just like he didn't literally tell you to chop off limbs. He's using strong language here to make a comparison. He's saying your commitment to Jesus should be so great and so strong that in comparison, it looks like you hate everything else in your life, right? Like, I love my dog, but not the way I love my kids. It's Colorado. Some people love their dogs like their kids. I don't do that, right? I don't love my dog the way I love my kids, right? Like, if you compared the two, it might look like I hate my dog, right? Because my kids, they got Christmas presents. My dog, he didn't get a Christmas present, right? My kids, they get great home-cooked meals, right? My dog eats the same thing every day. It's processed food and water, right? My kids get rooms where they have bunk beds in their own space. My dog sleeps in a crate, right? My kids get indoor plumbing. They can go to the bathroom. My dog goes outside, right? If an alien landed on Earth, thought my dog and my kids were the same, they'd be like, bro, you hate your kid, your furry kid. You hate it, right? No, this is what Jesus is getting at. Our allegiance to him should far outweigh any other relationship. The way we love him should be so intense that it looks like we hate other relationships. That's why he says to count the cost. Jesus doesn't lower the bar for discipleship here. There are no half-hearted commitments. Following him requires you to die to yourself. And if you notice this kind of devotion, it's tied to salt. Salt is good, but if it's lost its saltiness, it's not even useful for basic purposes. Notice he uses manure in this illustration. Manure at least has a use. It's fertilizer for the soil, right? Salt that isn't salt, that's lost its saltiness, is worse than manure because it's useless. It would actually ruin the manure. You need to throw it out. It has no purpose. Put this together. This is a strong statement from Jesus. The text is saying this: your commitment to Jesus is a good thing, just like salt's a good thing. But if you are not all in on Jesus, it's almost better that you didn't commit at all. You're worse than manure. At least manure has a use. It's a fertilizer. A half-hearted commitment to Jesus has no use at all. You got to throw it out. Too strong? Because that's what that means. That's what Jesus is saying there. See, in the ancient world, you couldn't get salt from the grocery store. You got it from the Dead Sea or in mines and marshes, and salt was often mixed with other minerals. And over time, the real salt would leach out and it would be washed away by moisture, and all you would be left with is this white substance with no flavor. It looked like salt, but it was fake. And Jesus is saying that can happen to us. We can keep the appearance of Christianity while real devotion drifts away. We can look like salt, but we lose our flavor. We look like Christians, but we're fake. If I'm honest, I think part of the reason we struggle to make disciples in the American church is because we don't talk like Jesus does here. And I put myself in that boat. I shy away from this kind of strong language when I'm making disciples. I mean, picture this scene. Jesus has a huge crowd that's following him. You would think his basic instinct would be like, this is awesome. Let's get a selfie and post this on Instagram. 5,000 people are following me by the Dead Sea. Come next week, bring a friend, right? That's not Jesus's instinct here. He's skeptical. He calls into question their commitment. He's like, are you guys in the right place? I feel like we do a disservice in the church today when it comes to discipleship because we think that because grace is free, Christianity must be easy. We take Jesus' call to die and we soften it into just an invitation to attend. We replace crosses with comfort, surrender with suggestion, obedience with intention. We tell people, following Jesus doesn't cost you anything. And then we're surprised when they walk away from him because life got hard. Because Jesus never begged for half-hearted followers. He never padded his numbers by accepting apathy from his followers. He thinned crowds by demanding total allegiance from them. Listen, Jesus is not being harsh here. He's just being honest. He knows that partial devotion doesn't transform anyone. Half-hearted commitment will collapse the moment it costs us something. So Jesus is coming along and saying, hey, I don't want you to just add me to your life. I want you to give up your life entirely from me. And he calls us to give up everything because at the end of the day, Jesus is the one who gave everything. Let me be clear. Our surrender is never an attempt to earn grace. Surrender is just the only reasonable response to grace. Obedience doesn't come from pressure to look like Jesus. It comes from participation with Jesus as we live with him. The gospel doesn't call us to become salt. It frees us to live like the salt that Jesus already calls us. And here's the deal, guys. A commitment to Jesus also means a commitment to the church. Let me say this as clearly and lovingly as I can. You cannot be fully committed to Jesus while remaining half committed to his church. That category does not exist in the Bible. You don't get to love Jesus and hate his bride. If you love Jesus, then you love what he loves, and he loves the church. This commitment is not about how intense we are as Christians. It's really about how reliable we are in the church. It's showing up when it's inconvenient, staying when it's uncomfortable, learning or leaning in when relationships are hard, submitting to one another when we don't get our way, serving when no one applauds, bearing with one another when it would be easier to leave. That's the kind of commitment that Jesus is asking for. And here's the deal. We cannot say that we are committed and all in on Jesus if we're not committed and all in on his church. So let's land this where Jesus lands it. He doesn't just do information. He has a call. He has a challenge here. Jesus doesn't just end his teaching, hey, think about this, meditate on this week, come back next week. He ends it by saying, he who has ears, let him hear. In other words, he demands a response. Salt's not a personality trait. It's not a vibe. It's not a church name. It's a way of life together. Are you all in? The world doesn't need a church that thinks it's salt, but in reality, it's fake. The world needs a church that takes seriously what it means to be the salt of the earth. Let's pray.